It was supposed to be a warm, joyous occasion on the evening of my 65th birthday, with the banquet hall glistening with golden light, glasses clinking in celebration, and friendly conversation buzzing through the air. However, my husband, Rick, abruptly rose to his feet, raised his glass, and boomed across the hall, "I've had enough. If it weren't for I would have ended our marriage long ago if it weren't for our daughter and family." The room went silent, and everyone's eyes were on us. Friends and family looked at us in astonishment, and whispers echoed through the crowd. I stayed motionless, monitoring Rick with my fingers. "Maggie, you are the most boring person I've ever met." Rick lifted his chin, and his voice became more passionate. This night was supposed to be filled with laughter, but instead it turned into the most embarrassing moment of my life. I felt my hand tighten around the stem of my wine glass and tremble a little. "For more than 40 years, I have experienced what has been nothing short of torment with you. We have always felt more like business partners than husband and wife. However, I can no longer bear it." Beside me, my daughter Olivia remained still, her face devoid of color, and she gripped her 5-year-old son Ethan with her shaking hand, who, unable to comprehend why his grandfather had become so irate, looked up at him with wide, bewildered eyes. "What are you saying, Dad?" Olivia's voice trembled in shock, but Rick didn't even look at her. Instead, his eyes swept across the sea of guests and locked onto a woman there. My gut wrenched when Linda Collins, his former flame, stood quietly and elegantly in a deep blue gown in a corner of the banquet hall. Her smile tugged at the corners of her lips, and everything made sense after 3 months. On the day of Linda's husband's burial, Rick left the house nearly glowing since he had finally been able to pursue the love of his life freely and shamelessly after his husband had died of cancer not long earlier. Rick should at least try to look a little somber, don't you think? Are you worried that Linda might find it inappropriate or that her children might resent you showing up like this, standing before the mirror? I even made him buy an expensive new suit for the occasion, and I had even made fun of him at the time. Her husband had just died. Rick awkwardly adjusted. "What do you know?" he scoffed. His reflection in his bow tie showed a smug glint in his eyes, and there was even a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Linda will be thrilled to see me," he said, as if he could already picture how her eyes would light up at the sight. When I saw his sheer vanity, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. I fixed his suit and murmured, "Rick, that's enough. You're going to a funeral, not an award ceremony, don't overdo it. Go stop doling." He wasn't listening, though, and instead, he grabbed a kin of his hair was smoothed down with a few extra passes of hairspray, and only then did he nod at his mirror and walk out the door. The funeral was gloomy, with a sea of black suits and stark white shirts, and everyone save Rick had the weight of loss imprinted on their faces. I whispered to him to at least try to tone it down, but he ignored me, his eyes darting around until they landed on Linda immediately after the service ended. He was there for a grand reunion, not to mourn the dead, and he stood there like an out-of-place peacock, the corners of his mouth showing a barely contained smile. He made a beeline for her with a spring in his step, and I could see the flicker of distaste in Linda's eyes when she first saw him. However, as soon as she saw me looking, that expression disappeared and was replaced by another one of satisfaction, and she looked at me, and for the briefest moment, a triumphant glint flashed in her eyes as her features effortlessly brought tears to her eyes as if on command, and her shoulders trembled ever so slightly, creating the image of a grieving widow on the edge of collapse. She then fell into Rick's arms as if he were her only comfort. I stood frozen, my fingers balled into fists, my nails cutting into my palms. Rick held her close to him, caressing her back tenderly while he said comforting words that were solely for her. He never once turned to face me, instead waving a dismissive hand in my direction. Similar to how someone would silently tell a bothersome fly to leave, I realized that this had been his plan all along. As I had been living my life on the inertia of our marriage, he had been preparing the groundwork for his escape, but I had been oblivious to it until tonight, when he finally removed his mask. His legal wife was the only thing preventing him from being happy, which is why he humiliated me in front of everyone. He wanted to force my hand and push me to the limit, but why didn't he do that years ago when we were younger? Why wait more than 40 years to make our marriage into a cruel joke? My eyes burned and my throat felt dry afterward, so I murmured to him, "Rick, do you have to divorce me tonight?" He didn't hesitate, but there was a tinge of irritation in his voice. "Yes, tonight let's go to the lawyer's office and get it over with," I said. He was so eager to move on from me and start his new life that there was no hesitation or second guessing. "What the hell are you doing, Dad?" Olivia finally broke down, trembling. "You and Mom are already at this point in life, what's the point of a divorce?" She tried to steady herself. For the first time, Rick hesitated, his eyes flickered, and then he slowly turned back to Linda. She was trying to reason, "And even if you divorce Mom, are you sure Linda will want to be with you? Have you even asked her?" Her words landed like A stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through the silence. He walked toward her, taking her hand in his, and before the whole room, "Linda," he said, "stay steady, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Her brow furrowed instinctively as she looked down at Rick's hand around hers, but she didn't immediately turn to face him. Instead, her eyes shifted to me, and I saw that after a moment of jealousy, her gaze shifted to my necklace and the diamond-studded bracelet on my wrist. Her face briefly lit up with calculation before she turned to face Rick, who was observing her with unwavering devotion, and his eyes were filled with Rick's concern was apparent as she coughed delicately, playing frailty. "My health has never been great, and I don't think I'll be around much longer. I may not have much time left to spend with you." When she coughed, he reached out to pat her back in an attempt to ease her discomfort, but as easily as she had begun, Linda stopped coughing, leaving his hand hanging awkwardly and made her. "You don't have to worry," he said, convinced that he had the money to ensure that she received the best medical care possible. She then stole another look at me, then, as though on cue, she shaped her features into a gesture of appreciation and desire, and with a gentle sigh, she melted into his arms. "I'm willing," she whispered. The words should have sounded romantic and tender, but on her face, which was etched over time, the display felt anything but, and yet Rick was completely enamored with Linda. His whole face lit up, and his voice was full of love as he whispered her name in front of family and friends. The two of them cuddled, unaware of anything else, as though nothing else mattered, but I saw it for the briefest moment. Linda's eyes showed a clear flash of disgust. Olivia, standing off to the side, darkened her face and clenched her fists at her sides. She scoffingly strode forward, positioned herself between them, and forcibly pulled them apart. Her voice was cold. "Dad. I don't know." Rick was briefly surprised by this woman, but it didn't last long because his face hardened with resolve, and his posture straightened as though he were prepared to stand against the world for Linda. "I don't need your approval," Olivia said. Her jaw tightened, her teeth grinding together in rage, and Mom would never consent to a divorce, so Rick didn't. Flinching, he just turned to face Linda, staring at her as though she were the only person who mattered to Ed. His voice dipped into something low and personal. "If that's the case, would you run away with me?" Linda hesitated, her lips parting uncertainly. "I feel like I'm not feeling well." Rick pulled her close, his voice brimming with her eyes fluttered, then slowly shifted downward to the hand he had possessively thrown over her shoulder. A shadow passed across her face as she was reassured that even if we eloped, I would have more than enough money to support you. Linda's eyes shone as Rick spoke in a quiet, almost thoughtful tone. "Are you really that wealthy?" she asked, unaware of the change in tone. "But between my savings and my pension, I must have, what, $7, maybe $800,000, more than enough for us to live comfortably." Too preoccupied with his grandeur to observe the cunning expression on their faces, he pressed harder, his voice increasing more urgent. "Linda, will you come with me?" She paused for a moment before her eyes met mine again, this time with obvious triumph, and then in the very next time she breathed, she turned back to Rick, her face softening and her voice taking on a subtle, playful tone. "Rick, for you, I'm willing to give up everything to go with you," she said, and he let the words linger between them like a vow. Suddenly, the two of them were engrossed in their theatrical romance, reveling in their farcical display of passion. The man I had loved for decades had been carrying another woman in his heart the entire time, and everything I had given, all of my devotion, and all of my sacrifices had been for nothing. I had spent years taking care of his parents as if they were my own and raising our kids, and it was all a cruel, twisted joke. Every aspect of his life with unwavering commitment. When he was thirsty, I gave him a glass of water before he even asked. When he was interested in a dish, I went straight to the kitchen and carefully prepared it so he could have it that same evening. And when he became ill, I stayed by his side, nursing him back to normal health with no complaints, but it didn't matter compared to the woman who had once left him for money. I had thought that if I truly loved him and gave him everything I had one day, I would melt the ice around his heart, but now I realized that Rick's heart was nothing more than a stone, if he even had one. Wanted everything with Linda, he saw only perfection, but with me, he saw only flaws. It turns out that when someone doesn't love you, they can lose sight of you, no matter how much you suffer or how deeply you hurt them, they won't even notice you as much as flinch because, in their world, only their feelings count. In reality, though, I was tired, wasn't I? I was 65 years old, still strong, and able to support myself, so it wasn't that much to humiliate me like this and throw me out in front of all of our family and friends. Perhaps this marriage had been doomed to fail from the beginning, but at that moment, I decided to do something I should have done long ago. Rick's eyes widened in shock as I marched up to him, raised my hand, and slapped him in the heart. In over 40 years, I had always been the submissive wife, obeying his every word without question, so he had never seen me fight back. His hand was shaking as he pointed at me, Maggie, struggling to put words together. Before he could finish, Olivia was at my side, supporting me with a firm yet gentle grip and directing me back to my seat. I turned to face the shameless couple, who were still holding on to each other, and said in a calm and cool voice, Rick, if you want to be with her, I won't stand in your way, but you'll walk out of this marriage empty-handed. Olivia's face darkened at my words, and she frantically reached for Rick's hand, gripping it tightly. If you go through with this, if you leave Mom for her, it's not like you were ever on my side anyway, so I don't care what you think of me. That was it for Linda. He was willing to abandon his daughter, but Rick was focused on his fantasy. Rick yanked his hand away with a callous scoff. Are you trying to threaten me into insanity? Her face went ashen when she heard me say that he would have to leave this marriage with nothing. She had dangled herself in front of Rick for years, without fully committing, keeping him on the hook, and now, suddenly, she was not as devoted as he had been to spend the rest of his life with Linda. Her husband had only recently passed away. If it wasn't for his money, she would have been willing to be with Rick because she had been waiting for his inheritance. If he left this marriage with nothing left for her, Linda quickly changed strategies and slid into her most practiced role as the pathetic, selfless woman who cries. A single tear fell down her cheek as she said, maybe we shouldn't force it right on cue if your daughter doesn't approve of us. She was portraying someone in an impossible situation, and her performance was deserving of an award. On another face, it might have even been convincing, but on a woman as cunning as she was, it was almost hideous, and yet Rick fell for it wholeheartedly. He locked hands with her and spoke in a loving voice, Linda, my love, don't worry, nothing will keep us apart. Linda hesitated, but Rick silenced her. Let me take care of everything, she said reassuringly, and then he turned to face me, his face contorted in anger. Maggie, who do you think you are to demand that I leave with nothing? I laughed icily. Every item of clothing on your back, I bought it, the house, and the bills. Tell me, Rick, exactly what you have ever done for this family. He stumbled, looking for words after a long time of struggle. I paid for the food and daily costs. You kept every penny you ever earned, never once donating a dime to this household. He justified it by saying, you chose to do all that, that was your decision. I stared at him without blinking, allowing the weight of his own words to descend upon him, as if my decision to take care of our house and devote myself to our family somehow negated the years of work I had put into this marriage. In an attempt to appease Maggie, he coughed nervously and said, I'll not ask for anything you paid for, but the things I bought, my personal belongings, my pension, and my savings, I'd like to take those with me. At that moment, the room fell silent. Maggie, this man stayed with you for 40 years only to do this to you. In the end, kick him out and live your life to the fullest. You deserve to be happy, so don't let him bring you down. Even Olivia was hesitant. Her jaw tightened, and she whispered, Mom, you know what you wanted to say. I looked at her, then at Rick, whose face had become tense with anxiety. A slow, knowing smile appeared on my lips. Oh, and what exactly did you buy with that salary of yours? You hardly had enough to spend on yourself, and that so-called savings, do you believe that I have no idea where that money came from? I leaned back and spoke steadily and smoothly. Here's what I'm offering, Rick, return all of the cents you've ever stolen from me, and I'll grant you your freedom in exchange. I'll also sign the divorce papers today. What's wrong? You're unable to speak? With his entire body trembling and his anger barely restrained, Rick turned to Olivia, his eyes sparkling with desperation. He prayed that she would stand up for him and support him during this crisis, but Olivia just turned away. His breath caught when he refused to look at him, and then his rage erupted. Olivia, I'm your father. How can you be so callous, you ungrateful child? The room was already seething with dissatisfaction, and it eventually boiled over, disgusting our friends and family who had long been disgusted by Rick's behavior. Let them vent their anger at Rick, your pitiful excuse for a man who has been taking advantage of your wife for decades. Now, you have the gall to leave her for no reason at all, and you expect us to stand by and watch Rick's disgusted expression. Twisted in anger, his jaw twitching and his fists curling at his sides. He spat through gritted teeth, but I'll give everything back, but my pension is unquestionably mine, so I inclined my head. Rick, how could your pension not belong to you? It's a meager $3,000 per month. I would love to see how Linda would have responded if she had known that was all he had to offer. Just in time to observe how her expression froze, a slow smile tugged at my lips. Without saying another word, I took out my phone, called my lawyer, and told him to start drafting the divorce papers right away. After I hung up, I pivoted and strode for the exit, but Rick mistook my movements and laughed triumphantly. Where do you think you're going, shifting? His voice was full of disdain, and he sneered, your mind. Well, it's too late, I'll divorce you no matter what, I sighed, frustrated, and turned around. Rick, you are full of yourself. If we're getting divorced, let's do it now. You're going to the lawyer's office with me. His smirk disappeared as he signed the documents, and his face turned pale. It wasn't until he saw my total and steadfast resolve that he knew there was nothing left between us, not love, not nostalgia, nor even hatred, strong enough to bind us together, and that shook him. I didn't bother assessing his response because my only objective was to complete this divorce before he had the chance to change his mind. As I turned around and left, Olivia's voice faltered behind me, "Mom, Mom." I stopped looking back and saw her. She had 1,000 things to say but didn't know where to begin, as evidenced by her quivering lips and tear-filled, trembling eyes. I knew that Rick had always been the softer parent, spoiling her, while I had always been the one to push her harder. As she watched me leave, something in her eyes changed from uncertainty to recognition. Of course, in her heart, the balance had always been in his favor. Even just minutes before, she had been looking for excuses to keep me clinging to the father she had always admired. She began to doubt her father for the first time, seeing him not as the idealized man she had held in high regard but as the flawed, self-centered person he was. At the same time, she looked at me and realized the burden I had carried and the sacrifices I had made. For the first time, she saw the woman behind the mother, who had been stern and uncompromising. It all, and something new took root in her heart, understanding, and most importantly, a silent, growing love that had been there the entire time, just waiting to be recognized. I gave Olivia a gentle pat on the hand and told her, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Stay here and take care of the guest. Your father and I will handle the paperwork and submit the divorce agreement. After everything is resolved, we'll have a nice conversation." Her eyes are filled with feelings that are too complex to describe, such as her mother's suffering and her father's disillusionment. She used to idolize guilt for years, adding to my feelings of loneliness and exhaustion without realizing it. I was mistaken. Her voice faltered, heavy with unshed tears, and every word came directly from the bottom of her heart. Her body shook. And before she could stop herself, she threw her arms around me and clung to me, as though doing so would help her start to come to terms with everything she was experiencing. I rubbed. After calmly stroking her back and silently telling her husband to look after her, I turned and left without hesitation. Rick, not wanting to be abandoned, quickly grabbed Linda and rushed after me. By the time we arrived at the entrance, my driver was already waiting. After getting into the car, Rick and Linda showed up at the door pretending that it was their private chapel. Linda's eyes were fixed on the car's opulent interior, as though she had never seen anything so lavish before. Rick, on the other hand, was shameless as ever, and without hesitation, he yanked the door open, and I gave him a quick look but didn't say anything. He must have detected my disapproval because instead of retreating, he had the gall to smile and say, "Come on, Maggie, don't be so stingy. What's the harm in giving us a ride?" I sighed to myself. Spoiled by me for so long that he had lost his sense of place, and if I didn't let them ride with me, they would most likely wind up getting lost and wandering in circles on the way to the lawyer's office. If providing them with a ride allowed me to complete this divorce more quickly, then fine. However, at the lawyer's office, we were given. I observed the barely disguised disgust in Linda's eyes as Rick grabbed his copy of the divorce papers before I could even reach for mine and sign them without hesitation. He then gave me a smug, even triumphant expression while draping an arm around Linda's shoulders. "Come on, Maggie, sign it already." An expression, a knowing smile, came to my lips, and I simply took the papers and signed my name without saying anything. The lawyer collected the papers and was getting ready to turn them into the court, so when everything was finished, I pivoted on my heel and walked away without even acknowledging the sound of Rick, and behind me, Linda was celebrating, but as soon as I entered my home, Rick and Linda stormed in, and I immediately told the house staff to move aside. I was firm and sharp in my voice, asking, "What are you doing here?" Rick frowned, obviously annoyed. "I had just come to pick up my stuff." I laughed dryly, my voice brimming with derision, and I pointed to the things he was wearing, pointing to everything I had paid for on your back. Rick's face flushed red with rage. "Maggie, don't push it." I arched a brow, and I removed everything. Linda stared at me, her eyes wide with horror, her voice rising in incredulity. "You're crazy, you want him to leave here naked?" I chuckled. "That's his problem, not yours. I purchased your underpants, too." Rick, who was too arrogant to back down, straightened his back and shot back, saying, "I do have clothes I bought myself. Just wait, I'll return everything else to you." A few minutes later, he stomped downstairs, having changed into a button-up shirt that was decades old. Faded and a little loose on his body, he held a plastic grocery bag in his hand, and inside, I saw a few pathetic possessions, a single debit card and a battered old cell phone. He stood in front of me, his jaw clenched, shaking the bag toward me, saying, "These are mine." Without saying anything else, he took Linda's hand and abruptly left, leaving me with nothing but a tattered shirt and a plastic bag. When Olivia came home with her husband and son, her eyes were red and swollen, indicating that she had been crying for a while. The moment she saw me, she was unable to contain her tears, just as when with tears in her eyes, she threw herself into my arms and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I must have hurt you so much over the years. I was so blind, always siding with Dad, and I never saw the truth until today. I've been such a terrible daughter." I held her close and rubbed her back, and my eyes lingered. As I sighed softly and said, "I've let it go, sweetie," my voice faltered a little. Her eyes glistened with grief and intense worry, her brow furrowed, and her lips quivered. She was making a concerted effort to control her emotions, and she asked her mother, after the divorce, "Are you?" I stroked her hair and gave her a faint smile, saying, "I'm fine, you don't have to worry." That night, we spoke for hours on end, and for the first time in years, there was no distance between us. The unsaid barriers that had previously separated us had fallen, and we had never been closer. A month later, I arrived at Rick's showed for our final hearing at the courthouse, which went well, and by the end of it, we were officially divorced and no longer husband and wife. I was secretly afraid that he would cancel at the last minute and refuse to come, because if he did, the legal process would become a long and boring mess. However, not even an hour later, Rick and I couldn't help but wonder how he had persuaded her to marry him after Linda filed for a marriage license. In addition, they had planned a lavish wedding, to which I was surprised to receive an invitation. Of course, I declined. Olivia went instead. Shortly after she arrived, she sent me a video of a scene in which Linda is seen screaming at Rick while wearing a cheap, scratchy white gown. She is in a complete rage. "This is what you call a grand wedding, Rick?" I didn't see anything at all. I wanted a rundown little restaurant with a few random friends stuffing their faces with cheap food. Rick stood there looking completely deflated, his head drooping, and he said, "You dare call this my wedding?" And this she grabbed the hem of her dress, shaking it furiously. "You told me it was custom made and cost tens of thousands of dollars, so why does it feel like sandpaper and cause a rash on my skin?" The suit he wore hung off him awkwardly, ill-fitting, and wrinkled. Loose threads dangled at the seams. The bow tie at his neck wobbled precariously, threatening to fall off at any moment. He remained hunched over and silent as Linda unleashed her fury, only lifting it after her shouting subsided. "When the wedding is complete, we'll move back to my hometown and start a new life together. There is everything we need back home, so we won't be without anything." He tried to calm her down with an awkward laugh. "Please don't be upset, Linda. I promise I'll make you happy. Just wait a little while longer, and when we get there, I'll throw you the wedding you deserve, invite everyone in town, and make sure you get all the respect and attention you deserve." The video ended with Linda giving him a scathing, bitter laugh before turning away, and the last thing Olivia caught was Rick frantically chasing after her. Bending over to lift the train of her gown as she stormed off, Olivia sent me a confused message. "Mom, if I recall correctly, Grandpa and Grandma moved in with us because the house back in Dad's hometown collapsed years ago. Did you covertly pay to have it rebuilt?" I'd been married to Rick for 42 years, so I didn't even need to second-guess myself. I knew exactly what he was doing for years. He was lying to Linda and making false promises to keep her interested for as long as possible. I sent back a brief and straightforward response, laughing quietly, and he denied that the house had been there for years. When Olivia came back, she was unable to contain her laughter as she described the complete disaster that was Rick and Linda's wedding. It seemed that Rick had thrown himself into the world of social media, following the fads of the younger generation. Ever since he signed our divorce papers, he had been taking Linda on trips and creating videos. He meticulously crafted their online persona as a committed, inseparable couple, an old-fashioned romantic who loved his wife and enjoyed taking her on lavish vacations. Surprisingly, the ACT worked for a while, and their videos captured the attention of young idealists hoping for a similar love story with a little online celebrity. Rick was able to conceal his true financial status from Linda for a while, but their careless spending soon caught up with them due to their extravagant lifestyle and Rick's developing obsession with online celebrity, regardless of any savings he may have had. Rick, whose meager income from content creation vanished in an instant, decided to livestream their wedding to increase their visibility. He played the part of the faithful groom, perfectly clasping Linda's hands with exaggerated tenderness, making every glance and smile seem like a poetic declaration. Following love at first, the live stream conversation was flooded with praise. "Grandpa is so wonderful, he prepared the entire wedding to fulfill Grandma's desire. This is such a passionate, manic, and beautiful love story, proving that love knows no age boundaries. I hope they have a lifetime of joy." But behind the facade of a flawless wedding, reality was encroaching. Many of our mutual acquaintances were there, standing awkwardly in the background, their faces displaying a spectrum of emotions from uneasiness to open hatred. They exchanged knowing looks while holding their champagne glasses. A little too tightly, but eventually someone's voice broke through the sea of adoration in the live stream chat. You people are worshipping a man who has cheated on his wife and abandoned her for his mistress, and you call that love? What a joke. At first, the viewers wouldn't. Unbelievably, someone then barged into Rick's live streaming phone and held up their screen while playing a video of Rick's arm around Linda, haughtily pressuring me to consent to the divorce. Rick was astounded by the contrast between his former domineering, heartless behavior and the kind, loving husband persona he was now projecting. As soon as he realized the danger, he lunged forward to try to block the screen, but the person was too late because I had already uploaded it to my account. If anyone is unsure, search for my username and watch it for yourself. Rick's chat was inundated with angry comments within 10 minutes, I believed. Although he claimed to have regretted never taking her on any trips before, what about his previous wife? Did he ever consider what she deserved? If he truly loved her, why would he allow her to wear that awful, inexpensive dress? The criticism became unbearable. Rick rushed to stop the live stream, but the damage was already done. Linda's eyes were frozen on the screen, her face pale as she read the cruel remarks. When she saw one insult in particular, that dress looks so cheap, how could anyone believe it cost thousands of dollars? Something inside of her slowly snapped. Turned to Rick, her voice low and shaking with anger, asking him to tell me, this wedding dress you said cost tens of thousands of dollars, is it really that expensive, or did you just lie to me? She spoke slowly, as if she were holding back a full-blown explosion. Rick opened his lips, opening for another lie, but before he could respond, one of our common friends, who had had enough of his crap, beat him to it. Oh, Linda, please stop being so dumb, we can all tell that dress is cheap garbage. That was the last straw, and Linda became enraged. Shouting and grabbing whatever was within reach, she threw everything on the floor, including glassware, flower arrangements, and wedding presents. When nothing was left to shatter, he turned on Rick, who was blinded by rage, and began punching him, kicking him, and slapping him with all the strength he had. Rick staggered backward. When the chaos finally subsided, Rick was on the ground, moaning in agony and trying to defend himself while Linda rained blows on him. A few moments later, the wedding was officially over, and he was taken to the hospital. All that was left was a destroyed venue and an angry after hearing Olivia's version of events. I could only sigh. Rick's demise was inevitable. Linda had never cared for him, only for his money. 3 days later, Olivia tentatively approached me. The bride and a group of stunned guests were left speechless by the sheer disaster they had just witnessed. Mom, is it okay for me to go see my dad in the hospital? I had no reason to say no, regardless of what had transpired between us. Rick had shown Olivia genuine love as a child, and if she cut him off entirely due to our divorce, I might need to consider whether I had raised her properly at that time. When Olivia returned her gaze, it was complicated. Mom D was not doing well, and Linda had stolen his retirement money. I just sighed quietly, thinking that if that's the case, then you will have to take care of him. Olivia's brows were knit in deep tension, and I patted her hand. A light flickered in Olivia's eyes as she realized that they were married. At that moment, she spent no time finding Linda's children and demanding that they take responsibility for Rick's care, even though they were naturally reluctant. Despite their reluctance, Olivia ignored their desire to abruptly assume responsibility for an elderly man with whom they had no blood ties. When Linda's children finally gave in and revealed where she was hiding, Olivia sent Rick right to her door and demanded that she take responsibility for her husband. At first, Linda reluctantly agreed to put up with Rick's presence to receive her $3,000 monthly pension, but after all, she had stolen his retirement funds, so wasn't it only fair that she earned them? However, taking care of an ailing man who was unable to care for himself soon became intolerable for her every minute spent. Every annoyance and insult to her meticulously planned lifestyle that came with caring for him was a cause of aggravation. And when Linda became enraged, she made sure Rick suffered the consequences. The tenderness she had previously shown him vanished, and she reacted angrily by hitting Rick with her fists and her words. Remorse consumed him as he called me repeatedly, leaving message after message pleading for my assistance, but I never answered. He was helpless and could only endure it, and tears of regret ran down his face as he looked at the woman he had once adored and who had once smiled so sweetly at him. After weeks of treatment, Olivia made a decision that she knew was best for everyone and put Rick in a nursing home. By the time I saw him again, Rick's health had gotten worse, and he was once again taken to the hospital. He vowed to see him every month through Olivia, making sure he would be taken care of and relieving me of the duty of caring for him. Rick sent me a message, making one more appeal for redemption, in which he told me that he sincerely regretted the divorce and pleaded with me to visit him. I just grinned. When I heard it, the man who had drained me of decades of my life, degraded me, and betrayed me no longer had a place in my heart. I didn't want to see him again, but I wouldn't stop Olivia from helping him because that was the last act of mercy I was willing to give him. Going forward, I intend to heed my friend's advice. I embraced my single life and treasured my independence, so I got together with some of my closest friends, packed my bags, and left. The world was waiting for me, and I had a lifetime of joy ahead of me. My name is Olivia, and I can still remember my father laughing and lifting me onto his shoulders on my 6th birthday. What does my The amusement park was packed with people today, and from my position above the throng, I could see everything, the colorful balloons, the sweet aroma of cotton candy, and the soft melody of the carousel whirling in the distance, that my little princess wanted to do. While searching through her bag for something, my mother stood off to the side with her phone pressed to her ear, her brows furrowed and her head nodding absently. My father, on the other hand, was the source of my childhood happiness. He would smuggle cartoon stickers into my backpack after school, take me out for fried chicken on rainy days rather than forcing me to finish my homework, as my mother insisted on some days. He would even write notes of excuse so I could skip school tests without facing any repercussions. In contrast, my mother was reserved and disciplined, so there was always a slight trace. Her eyes were full of anxiety, and she carefully went over my homework, made sure I ate my vegetables, and bombarded me with reminders. Her love seemed so thick that it smothered me, so she erected a fortress around me to make sure that not even although I knew that a single drop of harm could seep through. I resisted her as a child because I didn't understand why my mother was so strict while my father's love felt so effortless. It wasn't until years later that I realized that perfect devotion feels heavy, while imperfect love feels light. When Linda's husband passed away, my father bought himself a brand new suit and doused himself in cologne. The car smelled richly of wood and spices, which made me wrinkle my nose. "Why so much cologne, Dad?" He adjusted his bright tie shone out more than the deceased's photo when we got to the funeral, but he surveyed the room looking for something, and I saw it the minute he did. He smirked confidently, acknowledging that it was a formal affair and that you had to show respect. He approached her in the flickering candlelight after spotting Linda, his lips curving into the tiniest trace of a smile. I watched from across the room as he stretched out and gently held Linda's fingers in his own. He looked at her, paused for a split second, and then abruptly released her hand while pretending to be indifferent. As he fixed his cufflinks, something inside of me broke, and on the drive home, I finally asked Dad, "What about Mom?" His face clouded with annoyance. He spoke in a tone I had never heard him use before, saying, "That's none of your business. I'll handle things with your mother." I froze for years because he had always been kind, patient, and loving with me, but now, when faced with the fact, his initial response was anger rather than remorse, and I realized that when a lie is revealed, anger frequently prevails over shame. On my mother's 65th birthday, my father stood and raised his glass, saying, "Maggie, let's get a coffee." My mother's fingers trembled slightly as the deep inhale of her wine reflected the sorrow on her face, and in the farthest corner of the banquet hall, an astonished quiet fell as everyone turned to stare at him. The scene was so ridiculous, but it was never more obvious to me than it was when my father approached Linda. My body responded before my mind could process it. Linda stood with her lips twisted into the smallest, most subtle smile. My hand, which had never before reached for my mother, did so for the first time in 20 years. It gripped her icy, shaking fingers, and she recoiled as though she couldn't believe it. Her pearl necklace broke, sending pearls flying. Pearls scattered over the floor rolled under the visitors' feet, but no one stooped to pick them up as I watched everything happen. A deep sorrow crept into my breast as 40 years of marriage were reduced to nothing more than an old lover's glance at my mother in the end. 1 month after she divorced him, she sent me a postcard from the Sahara Desert. On the reverse, the delicate pink light was soft and limitless, and the golden glow of the sunset stretched across an endless expanse of dunes. She did not cry or look back. Writing she had written, and for the first time, I am living for myself. I grasped the delicate piece of paper in my hands, my heart exploding with feelings I couldn't describe. For so long, I had ignored my mother's feelings. I had misinterpreted her power as being chilly, but she had always persevered and maintained her composure, so I never required my protection. Now, however, I wanted to help her, and I realized for the first time what happens when remorse is smashed into dust and rebuilt into the basis of love. Only then can I call myself Mom. Continue walking your unfinished road at your own pace.